So, why the name change from Better Angels to Braver Angels? Was there like
Mhm.
a process behind that?
Well, yeah. So it was a couple of
I like
things.
Braver Angels, by the way. I don't,
Well,
just
good.
curious.
I'm glad. It actually was my name child. Um, and there are two things that happened. One was once again trademark dispute.
Someone didn't like Better Angels.
Yeah, no, somebody with more money than we had was a bit upset about that, and things were ultimately resolved amicably. So it's okay. But we had to step away from the original name, and the name Better Angels is taken from Abraham Lincoln quotation. Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, I thought
You
this is what it
know,
was from.
yeah, well, yeah, that's absolutely right. It was, referenced, touching the better angels of our nature
Yep.
in his first inaugural address on the eve of the Civil War, right? Trying to sort of stave off the apocalypse that was to come. So, Better Angels, that's where the original name came from. I advocated for a shift to Braver Angels for two reasons. One of them practical, being the fact that I thought a similar sounding name would allow us to preserve as much brand recognition as we could, right?
They're
Which I
close.
Right,
I'd assume they're the same.
exactly.
Yeah.
So on that front, it seemed like a sound choice. But also, there is something of a
You know what I prefer?
what's that?
Courageous Angels. No, I'm kidding.
Well, maybe the trademark is available on that one,
Probably.
subsidiary.
Oh,
But the more substantive reason was, there is a cottage industry of, you know, of nonprofit organizations and foundations committed to depolarization and bridge building work. This field is now, in the last few years, expanded rapidly. Other
because
players
everyone's
have
freaking out
stepped
about
into
it.
it,
Yeah.
right? And so it's now becoming more sort of firmly formed, and it's maturing. But you've had sort of a cottage, sector for a while doing this kind of work, within which, the value and virtue of empathy has always been foundational.
And this is the
Uh,
thing that
mhm,
is destroying us, in my opinion,
mhm,
is that if someone's your ideological enemy,
mhm.
they're now not just worthless as a human being, they're actually not human or dehumanized.
Mhm.
And so whatever vitriol you direct at them is
Yeah,
somehow now justified.
right.
Like that's the core problem.
Yeah. Well, it is. It is. And there's so much more we can say about that. But the reason, and owing to that fact, in this sort of sector as it had existed, there's naturally a deep sort of emphasis on the value of empathy in being sort of the spirit that guides bridge building work. And of course, because, in order to really develop a deep relationship of trust with you, if especially if we are tribal, opposites, it's going to be important for me to be able to demonstrate the fact that I can kind of, put myself in your shoes to sort of see things as you see things, to demonstrate the fact that I, have some understanding of who you are, what's important to you, and that I care enough to have that understanding and demonstrate it. So the emphasis on empathy is needed, but it had long been evident to me that to really pursue this work into sort of the heat of America's tribal and political conflicts, which is where it needs to go, it takes more than just being empathetic. You really do need courage. You really do need bravery to be able
Increasingly,
to
unfortunately.
sustain. Well, and for two immediate reasons. One, the most obvious one, is that you try and reach out to people who have uh, been culturally kind of like pitted against you. There's going to be oftentimes a level of distrust towards you, and maybe even a tendency towards being a little bit mean towards you, maybe just on the
Maybe.
basis, just maybe, just on the basis of the fact that you're from the other party. But people in your own party, your own comrades and compatriots, will oftentimes look at you with some degree of suspicion, and maybe even, a sense that you've sold out, on the basis of the fact that you do choose to empathize with people who think differently, because people on each side are, to whatever degree, find themselves committed to the notion that, look, I can't, honor
Break
this
bread with those
person.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I
So
can't socialize with these people. I can't keep company with them, because if I do, I'm entertaining fascists. If I do, I'm entertaining people who hate America. right? And if you're doing that and you say you agree with me, but you're friends with them, then I've got a little bit of suspicion towards you too. So bravery wound up being a necessary point of emphasis. And I think that it helped to fortify the message of Brave Angels in a way that has been more empowering for people who have come into our ranks and has had influences on the larger space as well.
I agree, and I like it. And I want to affirm that one of the most noxious beliefs nowadays is that if I sit with you, then somehow I'm vouching for everything you believe in about everything under the sun. And if there's one other statement that's like, oh, you know, hung out with that person and thus you've blessed everything about them. And if they, you know, like the entire thing is like, well, you know, I talk to people in real life all the time and like, I'm, you know, like I'm trying to agree with everything that, that they say. And there's a word that bugs me. And it's funny now because I you know, I'm something of a public figure and I like have, platform, but this term platforming, it's like, oh, you platformed this person.
Right.
You've like given them elevation.
You've given them legitimacy.
Legitimacy. It's like you bless this person who is intrinsically illegitimate, and you're just like, you know, you know, like when did sitting with someone somehow like have this kind of weight to it where like you're like, oh, can't talk to that person. And there's so many people now who suffer and struggle with this where there's like, oh, you know, it's like I can't be seen with this person. Like it's really it's worse than counterproductive.
There are two things, I mean there are multiple things, but there are two things that I'll mention that are intersecting, I think.
It's like, how the heck are you going to bring people together if you're like not allowed to, you know, have a conversation?
Well,
like,
that's
the whole
the
thing
thing.
is mind-blowing.
For many folks, there's a limit to the value of bringing people together, right? And so there are two things that I see sort of intersecting here that are most salient. You know, one is the fact that we've come to a point now in American life where, as opposed to times past where Republicans and Democrats, you know, different parties, but there's very little like deep-seated social animosity between the parties, you know. Yeah, I mean, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, you know, there were polls taken, I think at least in the 60s, asking the question, if your child married a Republican or a Democrat, would you care? And it was like 5% of Americans cared. People were you know, but if they married a Catholic, right? I'm not sure what the exact figure is, but it is well upwards of 50%.
Yeah, that was 52,
Yeah, I think it's upwards of 50%. Now nobody cares what religion you are. It's a question of what your political party.
Well, politics is the new religion.
Well, yes.
And so unfortunately, media tribes, when I was sitting with Arthur Brooks, he said that like media tribes are the new mini religions.
Well, so the difference is...
You're forming a new mini religion.
Well, you know, civic religion is a phrase that has some history to it. And you might be, maybe you know Eric Liu. Yeah. So there's some Eric talks about. But so the differences between us have extended to being beyond the pale for people in a way to where, you know, it's not just that we have a good faith disagreement about something that's important, but we have a, you know, I can infer at least that we have a moral disagreement on things that are characterologically determinative of your value as a human being in some respects,
it's
right?
Very dark.
And so that makes us not want to interact, but you couple that with the fact that we live in an attention economy within which we are competing for space to be heard. We have more opportunities and more platforms to be heard than ever, but the competition over that, I think, is probably fiercer than it has ever been. And so I think people have a sense of, okay, if you have a platform, holy shit, we all want a platform, especially a platform that people actually come to. And so if you have a platform, you have ethical responsibility, you've got to use that resource, you know, wisely, you know. If you give that resource to somebody who's going to use it to advance systemic racism, just for example, you know, then you are investing in that anti-human project. You're investing in that project of hate. And so, you know, the intensity of sort of the competition within the kind of, you know, information and you know, attention economy meets this moral paranoia. And I don't say moral paranoia to be dismissive of it because, you know, look, I get it. I mean, people have deeply felt reasons for not wanting to elevate, you know, Milo Yiannopoulos or whoever it is you're you're talking about. Oh, I guess we've all forgotten about Milo at this point.
That
But
was a fine example. I got it.
yeah, right. But it's created this context in which we need to now make the case for why it is utterly imperative, not just for the survival of democracy, but also for the advancement, to put in the racial justice context, of a larger project of equity and equality and social justice in American life, to be able to engage our neighbors.
Yes.
Right? In constructive discourse. We have to make that case anew now in 2022.
Yeah, that's the case I'm making as well, man.